She was chained to the stake, the wood piled up to her ankles, and suddenly the Duke threw down his scepter. "Unchain her, and let anyone touch her." The scepter at the stake. "Your satchel of herbs is safe, clutch my waist, do not fall. You may cry when we reach the keep." The late winter wind, laced with shards of ice, stung my face like 1,000 needles. I was chained at the center of the stake, my wrists raw, the iron rings clanking a sharp, echoing clang in the desolate city square, a death knell. The noon sun offered no warmth against the chill deep in my bones. Firewood was stacked to my ankles, dry kindling mixed with pine resin, ready to consume my skirts the moment Valen gave the order. "She is a witch." Martha's screech tore through the crowd. She was pressed to the front, clutching a stone, her nails digging into her palm. "My daughter died drinking her potions. She used dark arts to steal my daughter's life." More stones followed. One grazed my cheek, leaving a stinging line, another struck my shoulder. I stumbled, the chain biting harder into my wrist. I wanted to tell them it was the plague, that I had used every herb my mother left me, but could not save her. My voice caught in my throat, drowned by the villagers' fury. Their eyes, filled with fear and rage, threatened to engulf me. In the kingdom of Verona, the word "witch" meant death, no evidence, no defense required. Valen stood beside the stake, holding a searing iron brand. The word "evil," etched on its tip, gleamed malevolently in the sun. He wore the deep crimson vestments of the Inquisitor, the golden cross embroidered on his collar, yet to me, that cross was more unsettling than the pyre. "Ilara," he spoke, his voice thin like metal scraping metal. "Confess to harming others with your dark arts, and I will grant you a swift end. The flames will consume you quickly." I tightened my grip on the small satchel of herbs tucked in my sleeve, my mother's last token. It held dried mint and marigold, common remedies for the chill, yet Valen called it a vessel of wickedness. "I have harmed no one," my voice trembled, but my gaze held his. "These herbs are for healing, as my mother once healed the wounded soldiers." "Your mother?" Valen scoffed, bringing the brand closer to the pyre. Sparks crackled up, landing on my skirt, burning a tiny black mark. "The Northland's witch who was burned 20 years ago. You are the same as her. You shall both atone in fire." He waved his hand. 2 Templar soldiers advanced with torches. The heat of the flame grew closer, I could smell the scorching of my own dress. Just then, the urgent gallop of horses thundered in the distance, tearing the square's clamor like a thunderclap. The villagers turned, and I squinted into the distance. A troop of black-clad riders sliced through the crowd. The man at the front rode a massive steed, his black duke's cloak snapping in the wind. A deep, visible war scar on his left cheek stood out starkly in the sunlight. It was Duke Samuel. I was stunned. He was the Kingdom of Verona's commander-general, holding sway over the city's outer military forces. He was private, moving only between the battlefield and the king's palace. Why was he here? The troop halted before the stake. Samuel dismounted with an ease that belied an idle nobleman. He ignored the villagers and Valen, walking straight to the stake, his gaze fixed on my chained wrists. Valen was clearly unnerved but tried to cling to his authority. "My Lord Duke, this is the church's witch hunt business. You should not interfere. My business is not for you to dictate." Samuel cut him off, his voice as cold as the late winter ice. He suddenly raised his hand and hurled the silver scepter from his waist. It flashed in the air, striking the brand in Valen's hand with a loud clatter. The brand fell, rolling far away on the stone floor, leaving a scorched streak. "Let any man dare touch her." Samuel's roar rattled my eardrums. He stood before me, his black cloak shielding half my body like a strong barrier. The villagers fell silent. Valen's face flushed purple, but he dared not advance, pointing at Samuel. "The Duke transgresses divine authority." By protecting a witch, do you not fear the church's wrath? Samuel looked back, his cold glance forcing Valen to instinctively retreat a step. Divine authority does not command those under my keeping. His voice was low but bore undeniable authority. From this day forth, she belongs to me. Cain, the Duke's close aide, stepped forward immediately, produced a key from his belt, and deftly unlocked the chains on my wrists and ankles. The iron clattered to the ground. My legs, numb from being chained for so long, failed me, and I stumbled. Just as I thought I would fall onto the pyre, a strong hand gripped my waist. It was Samuel. His palm was hot, calloused from years of holding a sword, searing my clothing where it touched my waist. I froze. I looked up and met his eyes, deep brown, like a forest lake, now reflecting the sparks of the pyre and holding an emotion I could not read. "Can you walk?" he asked, his tone softer, yet still carrying a terse command. I nodded, but could not steady myself. He simply bent, scooped me up into his arms, a motion that was not gentle, but utterly secure. I instinctively grabbed his cloak, my nose brushing against the scent of leather and a faint trace of gunpowder, the smell of the battlefield. "Clutch my waist," he said, looking down, his warm breath on my forehead. "Do not fall off." He swung himself onto the horse, holding me close against him. Clenching his legs to the horse's flanks, the animal neighed and turned toward the square exit. Pressed against his chest, I could hear his strong heartbeat, feel the warmth beneath his cloak. The fear and pain seemed somewhat soothed by his proximity. I glanced back at the stake. Valen remained rooted, glaring at us with a face of iron gray. Martha hid behind the crowd, watching me with complex eyes, no longer shouting, "Witch." The wind whistled past my ears, carrying the scent of scorched wood and the horse's whinnies. I touched the satchel in my sleeve. Safe. The faint aroma of mint remained. Samuel must have noticed my movement, for he looked down and asked, "Your satchel of herbs is safe?" "Yes," I whispered. My tears finally fell, hitting the back of his hand. It wasn't pain, it was grievance, relief, and a vague, confusing panic. Our status was vast, he, the commander general, I, the accused witch. Why did he save me? Was it because of my mother? He said nothing more, only patting my back gently with his other hand, like calming a startled animal. "Cry when we reach the keep," he said, a rare note of tenderness in his voice. "Valen's men are watching outside. Do not let them see your weakness." I quickly wiped my tears, looking ahead. The silhouette of the Duke's keep grew clear in the distant mist. The black gate was like a silent mouth waiting for us. But my heart grew more anxious. Valen would not relent, nor would the church forgive. Was this keep a sanctuary of salvation, or merely another gilded cage? The troop neared the gate. The guards bowed respectfully, but behind them, in the shadows, I saw a flash of crimson, the color of the Templar vestments. My heart leaped into my throat. I instinctively tightened my grip on Samuel's waist. The garret cage of the Duke's keep. The garret door is unlocked. But should you take one step out, the next thing that saves you will not be my scepter, but my sword against Valen's men. When Cain escorted me to the garret door, the late winter wind still swirled through the keep's corridors, wrapping the light of the lanterns around the columns, casting flickering shadows on the stone steps. I walked up, stepping on those broken lights, each step like treading an uncertain edge. The garret door was dark brown, years of grime embedded in the wood grain. When I pushed it open, it let out a groaning creak, like an old man's rusty joints. The first thing that hit my senses was the clean scent of herbs mixed with the mustiness of old wood, which surprisingly eased my tension. I walked in, using the faint light filtering through the door crack, to find the garret windows were heavily boarded up, only tiny slivers of sunlight leaking through the gaps, falling on a pile of unremarkable old things in the corner. I knelt and touched a familiar object, my mother's old herb grinder. The brass wheel was oxidized and blackened, but the edges were still smooth from years of constant use. Clearly, someone had deliberately kept it. So you truly knew my mother? I murmured unconsciously, pressing my fingers against the grinder. Through the cool metal, I felt a trace of my mother's warmth. She always said, the finer the grind, the truer the medicine. I would sit beside her as she worked her wrist, the sunlight catching her hair like gold dust. Now, only this cold grinder confirmed her presence here. Click-clack, the sound of a candle being lit came from behind. I spun around to see Samuel standing by the doorway, holding a burning candle. The warm yellow light reflected off the war scar on his left cheek, softening the grim line. He did not step in, only stood at the threshold. His gaze swept over the grinder in my hand and returned to my face, his tone still the cold command. Your mother. Was she the herbalist who treated the wounded in the Northlands 20 years ago? My heart skipped a beat. It was because of my mother. I clutched the grinder, my nails digging into my palm, afraid to admit it immediately. Valen had called her the Northlands, which confessing the connection would only put me in greater danger. I cannot recall, I lowered my head, my voice shaking. Mother died young, she never spoke much of the past. He took 2 steps forward. The candle's light moved with him, casting his tall shadow onto the floor, nearly covering me. The garret was small, his proximity made the air seem thin. I could smell him leather, gunpowder, and a faint hint of herbs, much like my mother's own scent. Cannot recall? He scoffed, pointing the candlestick toward the grinder in the corner. Then how do you recognize the grinder in your hand? I was speechless, only able to clutch the grinder, watching the candlelight dance in his eyes. Just then, a soft tap 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 sounded on the door. Kane's voice came from outside, laced with hesitation. My Lord Duke, I need a word. Samuel called out, enter. Kane pushed the door open, clutching a crumpled letter. His eyes, already vigilant, sharpened when he saw me, but he lowered his head to Samuel first. My lord, a church messenger just delivered this. Valen writes you are transgressing divine authority by sheltering a witch, and vows to take the matter to the king personally. He paused, glancing at me, lowering his voice further. Perhaps, we should send her to the border estate. It is remote, Valen's men won't find her, and it avoids the church's pursuit. No. Samuel rejected it instantly, his voice carrying undeniable power. She remains under my sight. Kane was visibly surprised, clearly not anticipating such firmness. He pressed. But, my Lord Duke, is tangling with the church over an accused witch truly worth it? She has a purpose. Samuel cut him off suddenly, his eyes falling on the satchel of herbs in my hand, his voice cold as ice. Her remedies can treat my old wound, better than the court physicians. She remains at the keep until my wounds are healed. My heart sank. So it wasn't because of my mother. It was simply because my herbs were useful. Of course. Why would the Commander-General protect a witch for no reason? I let go of the grinder. The chill from the metal crept through my veins, and the warmth I'd felt earlier vanished. Kane tried to speak again, but Samuel stopped him with a look. Go. Watch the movements outside closely. Do not let Valen's men near the garret. Samuel waved him off. Kane nodded, giving me a final look of warning, behave yourself. Silence returned to the garret, broken only by the sizzle of the burning candle. Samuel walked to the corner, lifted a heavy wooden chest, and placed it before me. It was carved with tiny herbal patterns. When he opened it, a strong scent of mint rose, filled with dried marigold, mint, and some rare herbs I'd only seen in my mother's books. Tell the steward if you lack anything. He closed the chest and turned toward the door. He paused at the threshold and looked back at me. Do not attempt to go downstairs. Valen's men are watching outside. If they see you, they will report it to the church immediately. I looked at his back, and suddenly found the courage to ask, "Did you save me because of my mother?" He stopped. The candlelight fell on his profile. I couldn't read his expression. After a few seconds, he spoke slowly, his voice devoid of emotion. "You only need to know that you are safe here in the garret." Without looking back, he gently closed the door. The final clack of the closing door was like a lock, separating me from the outside world. I knelt before the chest, my fingers brushing the dried mint, and tears welled up. It had to be my mother, didn't it? Why else would he keep her grinder, or know about these rare herbs only she used? But why wouldn't he admit it? The candle flame dwindled, and the sunlight from the cracks faded. The garret grew dark. I took out a match and lit another candle. The warm yellow light once again illuminated the grinder in the corner. I placed it on the chest, took a pinch of mint from my satchel, and began turning the wheel as my mother had taught me. The creaking echoed in the garret, like my mother gently answering me. Just then, I heard faint footsteps and low voices outside the garret. I quickly blew out the candle and pressed my ear to the door. 2 soldiers. One said, "Lord Valen said to seize the witch the moment she dares to leave." The other replied, "The Duke watches her too closely. We can't even get near the garret. We can only wait outside the keep." My heart pounded. Valen hadn't given up. He was waiting for his chance to seize me. And I, though rescued from the stake, was now trapped in this magnificent garret cage, with only my mother's grinder, a chest of herbs, and a duke whose reasons for saving me remained unknown. I relit the candle, watching the powdered mint on the grinder wheel, suddenly recalling my mother's words, "Herbs can cure sickness, and save lives, but what truly protects you is the one who chooses to believe in you." Samuel, would you be that person? Would you like me to use the narrative you provided to write the next chapter based on the analysis of Valen's likely trap?